Well, let's talk more about what's happening in Kherson. The defence and security analyst, Professor Michael Clarke, joins us. Michael, what's the latest in the city? Because obviously there's this jubilation that they've been liberated. People are coming in, including journalists and more aid. But the big question is, what next? What now?
Yeah, I mean, they're having a great time. Zelensky's had a great moment being there for the flag-raising ceremony. But they'll need more great moments like this before this business is concluded, because the battle for Kherson is only half over. They've got the city, but the city's not safe. So they've got the other half of the battle still to win, in effect.
What about the strategic importance of taking Kherson for the war itself?
Exactly so. The Russians are on the other side of the river, so they're on the eastern side of the Dnieper River. That means that they're within artillery range of Kherson. When they got thrown out of Kharkiv earlier in the war, they stood out and then just lobbed artillery shells into the city. And the Ukrainians had to launch big attacks to push them out of artillery range. And that's what the Ukrainians will have to do here. They've got to get the Russians another 30 kilometres or so away from Kherson in order to keep them out of artillery range. Now, they seem to have landed on the Kinburn Spit in the last 36 hours at Hiroisk. The Russians now admit that the Ukrainians have got to Hiroisk. Now, all that area is all marshy, bogland, it's lots of tributaries, as you would expect. But if the Ukrainians have got any heavy equipment onto there, I don't know if they have, but if they have, almost certainly they'll start to move to the south. In other words, they've crossed to the other side of the river in the south. In the north, at Novokhovka, the Russian delegated governor of Novokhovka, acting for the Russians, has said he wanted a 10-mile exclusion zone away from the river because they expect the Ukrainians to come across the dam at Novokhovka. Novokhovka is on the south side of the river. So if that falls, then the Ukrainians are in a position to sort of create a pincer movement to get the Russians to withdraw from Kherson. That's the next stage of the battle, and that's why I say the Battle of Kherson is only half won. They've got to get the Russians out of artillery range before the city is safe.
Yeah, Ukraine being spoken about a lot at the G20 summit that's got underway today in Bali. In fact, the US President Joe Biden was talking about it a short time ago. He was asked by a journalist, you know, is this it? Is this the pivotal moment in the war? And he said, it's too early to say yet. Is that how it's going to be treated at the G20 summit in terms of proceeding with caution? As you said, it's only half won. What can be done at the G20 summit to affect what's happening in Ukraine?
Well, things are changing strategically because Crimea is now under threat because of what the Ukrainians have been able to do in Kherson, because they're now within range, and the Russians will have trouble moving the troops that they've just relieved, as it were, by getting across the river. They want to move them to Donetsk, into this front, which is where the fighting is really fierce, but they'll have trouble doing that if the Ukrainians are keeping going and keeping attacking them. So it is a strategic issue. And at the G20, in a way, the Russians will say what they always say at these things. Lavrov will turn up, as he did in July, to the G20. He'll blame the West, he'll say it's all fake news, and he'll leave. He won't go away. I mean, he won't stay, he'll just go home. And the issue then is, well, what message does he take back to President Putin? And that's the issue, really. I mean, they're very unpopular. This is not, by any means, the turning point in the war. This is not the beginning of the end. It might turn out to be the end of the beginning, as Churchill famously said.
OK, Michael, thank you. Professor Michael Clarke there with analysis of what's happening in Ukraine.